I am GP that has an interest in lifestyle medicine, where I use nutrition and sleep and movement connection and rest to help people recover their health. And I've been really interested in the impact of breath work on our recovery, and more recently have been working with a breathwork coach for my patients as part of my team to help them recover their health, and been really amazed at the impact that it's been having. Everything from gut issues to breath issues, anxiety issues, sleep issues. Just really fascinated by just the impact it's having. It's something that's very new for me. Over the last 2 or 3 years, it's become part of my practice when looking at my patients. And I'm hoping that David Jackson is going to be joining me today. I haven't seen him on yet. He is actually the guy that's working with me, with my patients, and I've known David for sort of 10 years now, and he is an ex-rugby player, and he has been training elite athletes over the years, and is the founder of School of Calisthenics. He actually coached me a few years ago too, and he is now actually an Oxygen Advantage breathwork coach. And I'm just trying to get him on the screen. Fabulous, here he comes, and he's going to be talking to us about breathwork. And it's not coming. Come on. Oh, here we are. Hello.
Hey, how are we doing?
I'm relaxed now that I've got the technology working. That's the thing that I'm always nervous about at the beginning, like you're rabbiting on, you're thinking, can I get them on? So no, it's great to see you, David.
Good. Calm the breathing to calm us down. Yeah.
Totally. And I was just explaining how actually, as a lifestyle medicine doctor, how actually breath work over the last 2 or 3 years is new to me. Like I, understood the nutrition and sleep piece and getting people moving and connecting with themselves. And then actually, it was 2 or 3 years ago that I realized the power of breath work in helping people with physical and mental problems. And actually would often have associated it from a conventional GP point of view. We would have taught square breathing, and if somebody had a panic attack or anxiety. But the science now, and actually our work together, we're seeing some incredible breakthroughs for people with gut problems, with sleep issues, respiratory issues, and something that offers no side effects. It's just an incredible part of helping people recover their health. And so I have introduced you. I was telling all of the wonderful things that you
I heard you say he's trained some elite athletes, and then you mentioned after that sentence he's trained me. So I was thinking you were classifying yourself as the elite, which obviously you were.
Yeah, no, I'm at the other end of the extreme. You've got your elite athletes, and you've got people like me.
No.
So, David, it would be really lovely. Like, you've got a lot of history of working from looking at performance point of view, and it astounds me that actually, when I've talked to you a bit before, when you're a professional athlete, was breathwork part of that, and when did that come into your thinking, and how has that impacted your own experience training, and and why have you got into what you're doing at the moment?
Or just even to just mentioning a couple of things that you just said then at the beginning around, like, the breath is it's free for all of us. It's there all the time. And to start with, and hopefully people just watching this live, the fact that they're going to hear this conversation, we're going to talk about breathing, you can make that conscious decision to potentially do it a little bit differently or a little bit better, hopefully. And whatever our scenario, whatever our circumstance, whatever we're looking for in our bodies, in our minds, in our life, because the breath is automatic in the background and is going to influence all sorts of things from our autonomic nervous system to our digestion to how well we sleep, there's something for everyone. And that's I get passionate about that because it's so the barriers to entry are zero. Because you're going to do it anyway. Like, why don't we do it a little bit, but potentially a little bit better? And one really big misconception that people tend to have of, and this does link into your first question, like, was breathwork part of when I played professional sport, professional rugby? And the answer is no. And a little bit of, like, you know, in our example, the only sort of advice we'd been given, because none of the coaches had been trained in it or anything at all. And actually, even though some research into the benefits of how breathing and how the biochemistry is important, some of that dates way back to like 1904 with Christian Bohr and the Bohr effect, which is about carbon dioxide tolerance. But when I was playing rugby, if you were absolutely knackered during a training session, it would be like, put your hands on your head. You know, you're leaning over, or you want to lie on the floor. Put your hands on your heads. Take big breaths. That was the sort of only thing that we knew. And then one of the things that gets is a misconception for a lot of people, if we're talking about trying to calm down a little bit, or we're feeling a bit anxious and we need to relax. You know, the worst thing sometimes someone can say to you is when you need to relax and you're stressed, and say relax. And you're like, I can't relax. Whereas we need tools to be able to do that. And one of the things that's a bit of a misconception is we'll say take a big breath and relax. And we'd often say take a deep breath and relax. And when people hear take a deep breath, they go, and we do this shoulder shrug, this vertical breath with the mouth. And it's big-ish, but it's only filling from the top. It's not utilizing the diaphragm, which diaphragm is deep breathing. When we talk about deep, we need to think far from the top. Think of a swimming pool, the deep end of the swimming pool, where water is far from the top. And the problem with lifting the rib cage, breathing in with the mouth, is it's that type of breath is basically an over breath. It's like a hyperventilation. We get rid of a lot of carbon dioxide, and we're sending signals to the brain and the autonomic nervous system of a breathing pattern that replicates our fight or flight response. So when we're stressed and when we're triggering our fight or flight response, that sympathetic arm of the autonomic nervous system, we tend to mouth breathe, and that tends to link to upper chest breathing. And it's like shallower in depth, even though you might feel, you might feel like you're taking a big breath, but you're actually not filling the lungs. We're from the bottom up, which is what we want to be able to do in terms of the functional biomechanics of breathing. And then people often say things to us like, I don't feel like when I breathe, I don't feel like I'm really actually getting the right amount of air in. And this idea that we have to be trying to get more and more air in. Well, naturally, one thing will be, because you're not filling from the bottom up. If you only lift the top, you can't get into the bottom. But equally, when you're not moving, exercising or whatever, we shouldn't need to take these big breaths in. That's not calming and relaxing for the nervous system and for the body. So, that's one little sort of misconception I think will help a lot of people. We can talk about how we then what do we do if we don't do one of those sort of deep breaths? What is a real deep breath? But
I think it's really fascinating. I think one of the things, my observation, and increasingly so, is identifying this thing called dysfunctional breathing, where we're not using this big muscle called the diaphragm, which we can talk about in a moment. We are, breath breathing. We're using our upper chest. And I'm amazed now, I sit in clinic and I'm watching my patients as they're talking to me. And straight away, it's like, oh my goodness, we've got a dysfunctional breathing issue here. And for me as a medic, you've mentioned some words there. You've talked about the sympathetic system and the parasympathetic system. And for me, when we're in that parasympathetic system, we're tapping into our innate ability to heal, to boost our immunity so that we can fight COVID, to boost our immunity so we can fight cancer, to boost our ability to sleep, to boost, that ability to digest, the impact it has on our gut microbiome. I think we have this incredible ability to heal, and we need to tap into it. And breath work, like you say, is just a really powerful free tool where people, it's not about whether you can afford organic food. This is here and now that we can do that helps tap into that incredible innate ability to heal. Now, you've mentioned a little bit about us not moving our shoulders. We've talked a little bit about the diaphragm. I'd like you to talk to me about teaching people to use their diaphragm, because for a whole host of reasons, yes, it gets us into that parasympathetic thing, but for me, I see a lot of people with digestive issues, indigestion issues. And when I watch them now, I realize that they're locked in, like they're not using their diaphragm. They don't even know what that means. So I'd love you if you could just tell people what the diaphragm is, you know, how it's innervated, and how we can start moving it in that first step towards, you know, getting it moving and getting, you know, into that rest and repair zone.
Yeah, no, definitely. And one of the things comes, like when we talk about the diaphragm, we need to talk about the ribs as well, because the ribs, those low ribs being able to move creates a space for the diaphragm to be able to move itself. And just going back one wee little steps, I think some people have this question, because it was what I had. You talk about dysfunctional breathing and the shoulders moving. When I started probably 3 years ago thinking about, and it actually started for me as a question of like, am I breathing right? And I couldn't really answer that question. I didn't know if I was or wasn't. I didn't know how to find out whether I was or wasn't. And so went on this sort of journey of trying to figure that out. And, you know, I got recommended into the Oxygen Advantage, and sort of the rest is history. But some things to think about and look out for that people might not necessarily realize. You can ask yourself these questions, would be like, where are you breathing from? So do you tend to at rest? And you might not even know. So just think about it. Now, take a few seconds to time it. Where do you breathe from? Is it from your nose, in and out, or is it from the mouth, in and out, or is it a mixture of those two things? And then where in the body? So is it from the upper chest and shoulders and vertical, or is it from lower down? People often point around the stomach because the diaphragm is going to be situated near there. We'll go into the detail of the diaphragm in a second. Other things to look out for are, do you frequently sigh or yawn? That's a sign of dysfunctional breathing. It's like a resetting. We want our breathing to be nice and smooth and soft and even. Whereas when you take a sigh, or a yawn, like it's like breathing's normal, and then all of a sudden you do this like big breath. It's one of those bits, it's like a one hyperventilation breath. Like that's a sign of dysfunctional breathing. So that's one that people are often not aware of at all. And then a really nice simple one that we can do is just monitor or just observe your breathing for a minute and just count how many breaths you want to do. Try not to change your breathing, but just when you're relaxed and comfortable, not stressed at all, what's your body what's your brain going to tell you your breathing rate should be at your current situation? And we want that to be like 12 and below, ideally. Whereas for a lot of people, it will be, you know, mid-teens, 16, 17, 18, or even 20. So we want to try and generally just slow that whole thing down. And utilizing diaphragm breathing is going to be helpful with that. But then in terms of you're saying around like digestion and everything like that, there's a few things that the diaphragm is going to do. The diaphragm provides us with that depth of breath. So working from low down, and depth doesn't have to mean that it has to be big. At rest, my breathing should be, if you look at me, if I can move back a smidge, as I'm breathing now at rest, you shouldn't be able to see anything moving. And ideally for me, it should be silent. I shouldn't even hear myself breathing because I'm just sat here doing nothing. Yeah. Now we still want that to be coming from the diaphragm. So the depth meaning that we're actually filling from the bottom. Filling from the bottom up. We can. There's a couple of other things in terms of the vagus nerve runs through the diaphragm, so we get to stimulate the vagus nerve by literally breathing with the diaphragm. Whereas you're not going to get that same effect when we're upper chest mouth breathing. The nose is linked to the diaphragm. So when we are encouraging ourselves to breathe in and out through the nose, it's not you're automatically going to be doing this beautiful diaphragmatic breathing, but you're more likely to connect to the diaphragm. And I'll give us an exercise in a second to like literally do that and feel that. So nasal breathing is linked with the diaphragm, mouth breathing is more linked to that upper chest. And then when we are, in terms of digestion, when we are breathing with the diaphragm, when we're stimulating the vagus nerve through that, and breathing softer and lighter, we get to tap into more of the parasympathetic side of the nervous system, as you mentioned, by a number of different things. That vagus nerve stimulation, the diaphragm, the softer breathing helps with that. A little bit more buildup of carbon dioxide in the body helps with circulation and the parasympathetic. So it's multi-dimensional, but all pushing us in that direction of like better health and down regulating the system overall. The diaphragm physically, when it's moving downwards and back up, it's also massaging those internal organs nicely when we use it. If we're not using the diaphragm, we're not getting that. So it does help with the stomach. So where it's sort of situated, if I try to position myself a little bit, people will be able to, you could do this on yourself. It's very good where I said, when we're talking about the diaphragm, we can't not mention the ribs. And for me, like if I said to you, contract your diaphragm, the closest thing we probably do is like tense our stomach muscles, because that's all we sort of, it's around there somewhere, but we don't really know how to connect to it. Whereas if I asked you to tense your bicep, if you're like me, you've done, you know what that feels like. Yeah, we go, Sally. Yeah, we know what that feels like. Though we have a neural connection from the brain to that muscle, like it's wired quite well. Whereas the diaphragm, it feels a bit odd. So knowing where it is. So with your fingers, you can join me with if you want to as well, Sally. Is find your lowest ribs on the inside here, and if you run your fingers down, you'll notice that they make an angle. Something like mine, if I run them down, it's currently like this. And the angle it makes with your sternum, your best breastplate, we call that the infrasternal angle. And the diaphragm is going to be attached underneath those ribs. And, you know, depending on how much tension you're holding in and around this area, if you can try to relax that, not only can you feel where the ribs are, you can actually tuck your fingers underneath and potentially be able to massage a little bit on the inside of that diaphragm. Also the inside of the rib where the diaphragm attaches at the front, and then it attaches on your lumbar spine at the back. The diaphragm, when it's relaxed, is in like a dome. Think of like a parachute or a mushroom, like the top of a mushroom. It's in that line with where those ribs are. When we breathe in, we want those lower ribs to widen so that infrasternal angle gets wider, and the diaphragm has then got the space to move out. It's almost like pulling it outwards, and the diaphragm moves down a couple of centimeters. Then on the exhale, which is just as important as the inhale, too often we only focus on the inhale. The inhale, it's a contraction. Ribs being moved out, diaphragm moving down. On the way, on the exhale, the diaphragm gets to go back to its resting position. So it's flattened down, it comes back to that resting position, only if we allow the ribs to come back in as well. So there is some muscular work from those obliques to pull the ribs in, but a lot of the time we don't actually let go on the exhale. We keep holding tension inside. So it's important that we are able to let go on those exhales, but get the ribs in together so the diaphragm can go back to its resting position. If your breathing rates are quite fast, then, as I was saying, like we want to be like 12 or below. If our breathing rates are quite fast, what will often happen is before your diaphragm has had the chance to go back to that resting position and have a bit of a break, you're breathing again, because your sensitivity to carbon dioxide will be altered by your faster breathing rates. And the one thing that people, there's a big like whoa moment when I first come across this with the oxygen advantage, your stimulus to breathe, like why your brain sends a message to your diaphragm to take your next breath, is not because oxygen's dropped and you need to get more oxygen, it's that carbon dioxide levels in the body have risen. So the chemoreceptors and the respiratory center of your brainstem are monitoring levels of carbon dioxide. And when we breathe too heavy, breathe too big, breathe too fast, we become more sensitive to it. When you become more sensitive, your brain is always telling yourself to breathe. So we breathe faster. We get this cascade of events. So that faster breathing, at some point, you're going to probably like struggle to nose breathe because you're going to go to mouth breathing, because it's going to be, there's less resistance. It's going to feel easier to do that. But it's not, that's only going to exacerbate that over breathing. And then now all of a sudden we're mouth breathing, which is probably going to make you upper chest breathe, and you're doing it quite fast. That's sending messages of fight or flight, sympathetic tone. I always point this way for some reason for sympathetic and that way for parasympathetic, but for whatever reason. I think it's a seesaw. But yeah, we're then in a bit more of a stress state. And look what my body language, when I try to talk about, or even talk about being stressed, look what happens to my, like all that tension around that upper shoulders. And then we know that's the case. So being able to get the ribs moving, being able to use the diaphragm is really important. So one thing for people to that we can try to do now is a really simple little exercise to feel your diaphragm contracting. And what we basically do is create a vacuum. So as we breathe, if you think the way air comes into the body, you've got your thorax and your diaphragm is at the bottom of those ribs. When it moves down, it increases the space. When you increase the volume of that, the pressure is reduced inside of you. And air moves from high pressure to low pressure. So because your diaphragm is moving down, that's effectively pulling air in. You don't have to like try to suck it in with the nose. Yeah. So that's what we're going to try to imagine that, like visualize that. Diaphragm moving down, ribs moving out, and that would be pulling air in. But to feel the contraction, what we're going to do is create a vacuum basically by holding the breath. So we're going to pinch the nose and hold and close the mouth and try to breathe in when you can't get air in. But what you'll feel is, so low down here, you'll feel that diaphragm sort of contraction. It's going to feel like it's moving outwards and down. So it would look a little, I often like to put my hand there so you will see it moving. I'll overdo it. You don't have to do it as strong as this, but hopefully you'll be able to see something. So I'm going to go a normal breath in through the nose, a normal breath out through the nose, pinch the nose, and then I'll try to breathe in. Try to take a few strong breaths, and hopefully underneath here somewhere, depending on how well you are, connected to it. If you've never really used your diaphragm that much before, it can be a really weak contraction. So just like if you've never really like tensed your bicep before, and someone tells you to do that, it's like, oh, it feels. I sort of can feel it. Like it doesn't feel very strong. So it's something to be able to connect to and practice to. And anytime because this was a problem for me at the start when I said, asking that question, am I breathing correctly? And then you read about or hear about diaphragmatic breathing. So we need to breathe with the diaphragm. The diaphragm is the #1 breathing muscle. Let him do his job. Like, don't let those shoulders do the job for him. It's not fair on him. He's only got one job. That's it. Let him do it. But you go in, am I using my diaphragm? I'm not. I don't know. And I don't know if I'm doing it right. Like if you do that we call it a blocked inhalation. Normal inhale, normal exhale, pinch the nose, and you breathe. You can feel that contracting. At any time during the day when you're not sure, you can just do this. So simple to do. You can just do that. And then from there, we want to be able to think about putting the hands on those lower ribs. So find where those lower ribs are. Put the hands on the outside, just so you've got some feeling of don't like pushing hard, but just a little bit of awareness on the outside of those ribs. And then as you breathe in now, think about pushing your ribs out against your hands. And try to create the same feeling that you had internally somewhere down in there with your diaphragm of that blocked inhalation, but you're just obviously not going to pinch your nose. So we get this idea of ribs moving out, diaphragm moving down, and air then just gets pulled in through the nose, not with the nose. Yeah. And then one thing that will often happen for people in this position is, because we're used to vertically breathing rather than this nice horizontal breath, you'll still have these habits. So you'll go into this position, go, okay, Jacko, I get that, and then you'll go to breathe, and you'll go, and you'll still do that just because because it's habits. But something that can help is think about just very gently, like 1 or 2 or 3% effort of just pushing your elbows down. What pushing your elbows down towards the floor is going to help do is to just engage some of the muscles around the back of your shoulders, which are going to keep the shoulder blades and the shoulders like more depressed rather than raising up. So it will sort of switch off the neck muscles and the traps a little bit more. So if I just gently think about pushing my elbows down, and then I think about pushing the hands out as I feel the diaphragm move down, then on the exhale, the hands come back together. And the diaphragm moves back out. So we're thinking about inhale, exhale. And it's not just about the inhale. If we don't exhale well, and you don't get your ribs back together, then the diaphragm is staying like stretched. So it's going to impact the next inhale. So the two are just as equally as important to each other. And some people would even say that the exhale is even more important than the inhale. Yeah.
I mean, it's just totally brilliant. I want to talk about nose breathing. Well, I think that's brilliant in terms of those questions around, am I dysfunctional breathing? Nose, mouth, chest, tummy, what are you doing? What are the rate is? And just being observant. And then this initial thing you've talked about is identifying where our diaphragm is, that feel of what that feels like, and then identifying where the ribs are moving and getting these sort of shoulders relaxed. And I think just reminds me of a couple of patients recently I've had where one, lots of digestive issues, but terrible neck issues. And actually, when we got her breathing properly, not only did we improve gut function, but also these issues with her neck, which she'd seen so many therapists about, started to improve because she was using her neck to breathe. And it's so amazing how something as simple as what you're talking about can help us break into a lot of these chronic issues around our posture, around back pain, around issues. And also, I think, you know, you've commented there about stimulating this vagus nerve, and, you know, I talk a lot about gut brain axis, we both do. And how there's so much communication between the gut and the brain, and sometimes, again, breaking into gut issues are really hard, and or into mental health issues. And again, just getting the communication between the gut and the brain, so important. And again, can just be such an easy way to break into these cycles, so that we can then start working on nutrition, and then start working on how we're thinking, and just, it's such a beautiful, powerful and potent tool. So you know, some great tips there. What else do you want to talk about? Because I just want to give as much away as possible for people.
So like, one thing would be being able to, we've got to be able to change like habits. There's some people asking questions. Do you want to answer questions as we go, or do you want to wait till the end?
No, I haven't been. Let's have a look here. So what have we got? So just before we move on, we've got, should the belly expand out as we're doing this diaphragmatic breathing? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so if we think of our trunk, okay, like we are on this video, we're 2-dimensional, yeah, but in real life, we are 3-dimensional. So we want to, when we expand, we want to focus a little bit more on this lateral expansion, this horizontal movement rather than vertical. Yeah. But the reality is we're trying to expand in all directions. Okay, so in terms of, I like to, let's get our terminology right, so we're not confusing ourselves. Our belly and our stomach is not respiratory tissue. Respiratory tissue is like in the lungs. That's where we're trying to get air into the lungs. The diaphragm helps come down to pull air into the lungs. Like, the stomach is not about breathing, and ultimately, where your ribs move out and we get some 3-dimensional expansion, yes, your stomach, the area where your stomach is, will move outwards a bit, but we don't want to be just sticking the belly out, because I can push my belly out, but nothing. So I can just push my belly out, but I'm not doing anything to actually expand my ribs laterally. What I'm most likely to do is to end up in more extension of the rib cage and of the spine, rather than actually breathing and getting the ribs to move. That was another big one for me when you see like a picture of a skeleton or an actual, you should have one in the background, Sally. Like, doctors always have like a skeleton, but you know, like, and you think of the rib cage, and you'd go, you wouldn't think that the ribs themselves move. I used to think that probably, I never really thought about it, but when you were at school as a kid, probably you just sort of think, well, the ribs are there, they're like a jail to protect the lungs. They're just there as they're the outside of it to protect the lungs. I never really thought about them being able to move. And that can be, even just thinking about them moving can be a bit of a game changer for people. But certainly belly breathing and just pushing the belly out forwards isn't getting into the correct mechanics of functional breathing. So that is a really big one. So this just said Instacat has just said, I think that's what I've been doing, pushing the belly out. So rather than thinking about pushing the belly out forward, it might move out a bit, but focus on getting the ribs widening and back in on the inhale and the exhale.
I'd love to talk now, if I know we're using up so much time, but to talk a little bit about nasal breathing, because certainly, like, as a runner, I found it so hard switching and using the nose. And why is that advantageous? You know, how do we get into that? Are there some tricks on how to do that well? So just talk through that.
Well, let's I'll link it in with some stuff we've already said and build on top of it, because what I'm very keen for people to understand is that, like, how we breathe, it's linked into everything. So whether you're what your day-to-day breathing's like, what your breathing's like when you're sleeping, what your breathing's like when you're exercising, they're all going to affect each other, because you are you, and you are you 24 hours a day, and you are breathing until you take your last breath. Nasal breathing, like your nose, we've already talked about how your nose is connected to the diaphragm. So we're more likely to be diaphragmatic breathing, which is what is a sign of functional breathing rather than dysfunctional breathing. Dysfunctional breathing, we talked about, like, being more mouth and upper chest driven, and that being linked to our stress response, our fight or flight. So if I'm going out for a run, if I'm breathing Short, fast, shallow mouth breaths, I'm sending messages. Even if I like running, I'm still sending messages to my brain and autonomic nervous system of, this is a stressful thing to do. Like that's not what it has to be. Okay, so that's one thing. Those short, shallow breaths are also not as efficient at getting oxygen in. So when we're trying to get oxygen, every cell in our body needs oxygen for energy. The way there's like sort of 3 steps effectively, or if we break it down to 3 simple steps of how we get oxygen from outside actually into the tissues. Firstly, it has to get into the lungs. That's step 1. Secondly, it has to get from the lungs into the blood. That's step 2. And then step 3 is it's not good enough to just have it in your blood. It's about getting it from the blood into the tissues. And getting it, you can be efficient or not efficient. What's the opposite of efficient? Inefficient, deficient. You can be efficient or not at any 3 of those stages. In terms of step 1, getting oxygen in effectively or efficiently to the lungs, every breath we take, I can't not sing that when I say it, but every breath you take, I really shouldn't sing, should I? Every breath you take, depending on the size of the person, the average is about 150 milliliters is is not possible to be occupied. They call it dead space within the lungs and the air sacs within your airways. So the more breaths you take, the more air you're wasting in dead space. So short, shallow breaths, if I was doing 20 of those per minute, 20 times 150, I'm wasting 3 liters. Yeah. If I drop that breath rate from 20 to 10, I'm obviously halving. As long as I increase the size of the breath proportionally, I'm halving the amount of air I'm wasting to dead space. Now, you could do larger breaths and less of them per minute through the mouth. Granted, we can. But the nose, we've already talked about, is linked to the diaphragm. Also, those little holes, they're much smaller than the mouth. So they provide about 50% more resistance to the air coming in. And resistance in a good way. It gives your diaphragm something to pull against. That will help with intra-abdominal pressure and stabilizing the spine and the pelvis when you're running. So for good posture and running mechanics or running efficiency. But that 50% more resistance slows down our breathing, which when we're adapted, at first that can be difficult, right? But when we're adapted to that slower breathing rate allows for about 20 to 25%. So the research shows us better oxygen uptake within the tissues. So slower breathing allows us to elevate levels of carbon dioxide in the body, which is a good thing. So remember that we talked about the respiratory center monitoring those levels of carbon dioxide rising. When we allow carbon dioxide to come up in the blood, it reduces the pH of the blood, which allows the affinity that hemoglobin has for oxygen to be released from the red blood cells. It's hemoglobin that carries oxygen within those red blood cells, or predominantly within the blood, to release its affinity or its attachment it has. So it goes from the blood, that 3rd stage, from the blood into the tissues. So if you're not getting the oxygen efficiently into the tissues because you've got low levels of carbon dioxide because you're breathing it out all the time and breathing fast, you can't tolerate it, then you're always feeling out of breath, even though your blood oxygen saturations might be really high, 98%, whatever, but you still feel out of breath. And that is going to carry on staying in that cycle until we address our carbon dioxide tolerance and our sensitivity to it and our breathing rates. And nasal breathing will help us to do that. When you're exercising at the start, it might be more difficult, and therefore, because you're just not used to it, you're not adapted to it, the nose might feel blocked. The first time I tried to run nasal breathing like 3 years ago, I couldn't get to the end of my road, it was about 50 meters without snot pouring down into my mouth. It was a horrible affair. Yeah. But slowing down our intensity, and if we have to just be a fast walk to start with, we have to just like leave our ego at the door and allow ourselves to improve this breathing. And the other thing there's 30 different functions of the nose that Coates in a research paper years ago had identified that the mouth doesn't have, that show that the nose is designed for breathing. One big thing of that to highlight is nitric oxide, which is created in the sinuses and is a vasodilator. It does some wonderful things around like protection against viruses and things as well coming into the body. So one of the biggest things that came out with COVID, not only should we be putting masks on, we should have been telling everyone to be breathing through the nose. Yeah. Patrick McKeown from Oxford talked about this, but that nitric oxide helps open up airways. So the more you use your nose, you'll be utilizing it and your nose will start to become clearer. the other thing is with it is it helps distribute blood within the lungs more evenly. So that would be, we've talked about step 1, getting air in. Step 3, getting it into the tissues around that carbon dioxide effect. But the middle part, getting the blood from the lungs into the blood, so the oxygen from the lungs into the blood. When we have blood distributed within the lungs more evenly, that is going to be a more efficient to transfer, rather than when we mouth breathe, we're not utilizing the nitric oxide that's in the nose that helps distribute the blood more evenly. Gravity just basically pulls the blood down to the bottom of the lungs.
Yeah.
And then you might actually be upper chest breathing, so you're not really filling low down anyway.
Yeah,
so you're then again, you're in that cascade of events of like, you're still breathing and feeling like you're not getting oxygen into the tissue, so you still feel like you're out of breath. And for people, if they want to just take like one thing away from this, it would be try to breathe through your nose whenever you can, and see how that changes how you feel.
Yeah, so brilliant. So we've talked about diaphragm, talked about nasal breathing. Just quickly, somebody's asked about sleep, and I'm really interested in your mouth taping bit.
I know.
Can we talk about that just to finish off?
Yeah, of course. It's always it's always the weird. I'm always apprehensive about it because I know what misconceptions and what thoughts I personally had about it. It reminds me of talking to someone about church when you're like, I used to have misconceptions about what that meant. It's the same thing. The first time this is my little anecdote for it. So I started reading the Oxford Advantage book. I was never good at reading as a kid or anything like that. I read this book, the fastest thing I've ever read, because I just couldn't put it down. And when I got when I got I don't know, a third of the way through or something, but what you generally do is if you know you're not very clever, to make yourself feel better and feel clever, the best thing you can do is post a picture of a book you've actually reading on Instagram, right? So I'm like, I'm reading this book, look at me, I'm reading, just trying to feed my own ego. And someone commented back straight away and they were like, have you got to the bit where he says you have to tape your mouth at night? And I was like, no, I've not got to that bit yet. And I was like, I'm really enjoying that book. Like, I don't want to, that's weird. I'm not going to do that. Why would I do that? I'll probably suffocate at night. Anyway, then you read why and the rationale behind it and the importance of, when you're asleep, you're not in control of how you breathe. Your body is going to go to whatever habits you have created over a long period of time. You've said before in discussions when you're on our podcast about what you do with your health. It's what you do for decades that determines your health, not like having a salad tonight, everything's fixed. And so how you breathe for long periods of time, how you breathe during the day will affect how you breathe at night. How you breathe at night will affect how well you breathe the next day. When we mouth breathe, we've already talked about that mouth breathing being faster and being linked to that stress response. Is it going to be a good idea for me to be lying in bed, trying to be nice and relaxed and get a good night's sleep? Particularly if I'm lying on my back, my jaw's more likely to fall open because of gravity. And if I'm mouth breathing, I'm probably going to snore is one thing, and then the other is I'm sending those messages around about stress, about fight or flight, and staying in that state through my breathing. And also we lose research on mouth breathing compared to nasal breathing. We lose 42% more, or we can lose up to 42% more moisture through the mouth. So if you wake up in the morning with a dry mouth, it's likely that it's been open and you're dehydrated, and you're not going to have a great night's sleep when you've been sending messages of stress all the way through the night, as well as waking up dehydrated. So how do you make sure that you keep the mouth closed when you're not in control of it because you're asleep? Well, you have some external help. And one of the things to say is, like, it is for some people. I mean, I had one client that they were a bit like me at the start. They weren't sure about doing it, and they waited. A few weeks had gone by, and they're like, I've still not tried it. Anyway, they finally tried it, and they were like, Jacko, I got an email from them the next morning. Jacko, the best night's sleep I've ever had. They'd obviously got into a parasympathetic state because they kept the mouth closed and they were breathing through the nose, and they had a great restorative sleep. But they did say, there's absolutely zero chance of me getting any nookie from my husband now. Thanks for that. So I was like, that's not my problem. You have to deal with that. But for most people, for a lot of people like me, I would put the tape on and then I'd wake up in the morning and it's on my forehead. Yeah, or something like that. Or it's on your cheek, or it's wherever. It's anywhere but on your mouth. Because, and if that does happen, it's likely it's a sign or showing you, telling you that your body is not comfortable with your mouth closed. You're either taking it off yourself in the night at some point, or you're like pulling it off, and you're almost those habits. You're desperate to go back to mouth breathing, and that's not a good sign. So things that we can, it really isn't what we think in terms of when if you're coming across this for the first time. If you were like me, like that's weird. I'm going to suffocate. Like we're not, because one thing is your brain is far more intelligent than we give it credit. It's far more intelligent than you. If it can't breathe through the mouth, it's not going to let you die. It's going to breathe through the nose. Okay. And the more you breathe through your nose, the easier and more comfortable it feels. But saying that, we can, and I've actually used to not really be able to, would if I had a beard, would be like you couldn't, you'd have to go straight across the lips. Whereas actually, I've been experimenting recently now, and at night, going vertical, there's still space either side. So you don't have that sense of suffocation with a vertical strip. This is just 3M micropore tape. It costs about, you can get it from Amazon or wherever, your pharmacy. It's literally about 50p for a roll, or even less probably. So it's like surgical tape, like semi-see-through. And that vertical strip means that you don't have that sort of sense of suffocation because there is space there. You know, for some people, ultimately, they'll want to build up to where they can completely like seal it off. I always laugh at myself when I do this. When I was on the course being taught by Patrick McKeown from the Oxford Vantage, he would do this whole thing like I'm doing now, putting tape in his mouth. And I'd be like looking at him, laughing, going, Patrick, you look crazy doing this training with us, like putting tape on your mouth, and now I'm doing it. But big tip for people is in the evening, obviously you're not watching telly the hour before you go to bed, and your screen time, you're not doing that because Sally's told you how bad that's going to be for your sleep and your melatonin levels. But when you're reading a book or you're just doing something nice in the evening, relaxing, put some tape on. Get used to what it feels like. Don't just stick it on and try to go straight to bed. So get used to what it feels like. And I guarantee you, it might take a few weeks, but I actually the other week had, or maybe a month ago, was on holiday with some family that would never really talked about mouth taping with them, I don't think. But anyway, I was like full strip across the mouth. Woke up to go to the toilet. No, woke up to come downstairs in the morning. I didn't even remember that I had it. It felt so normal. So I'm like walking to the kitchen, like, then you only notice when you try, either someone looks at you weird or you try and say something and you're like, oh yeah, I've still got my mouth tape on. So it doesn't feel normal at first, but it might take a few weeks for it to stay on, but it is well worth trying. Particularly if you wake up in the morning with a dry mouth, you should try it. If you're a snorer, you should try it. If you snore through the mouth, it stops snoring through the mouth because it's closed. If you snore through the nose, you need to slow down. We need to practice before we go to bed, slowing down our breathing rates. Everyone should do this anyway. Because if you try to make a snoring noise through your nose when you're breathing really slowly, it's impossible to. The only way you make that aggressive noise is by breathing aggressively. So taping the mouth stops us snoring from the mouth. Slowing down our breathing just stops us doing any type of snoring.
Brilliant, David. We've taken 45 minutes and I could just go on and on and on. And my heart really is to connect people with you, you know, so that they can learn more, go on a journey with it. And I just, from my point of view, I cannot advocate it enough, regardless of whether you're just looking to want to get more aware and become more joyful in life, right through to whether you've got gut issues or chronic health issues or migraines, whatever it is. It's just a beautiful way and practices that are free, can really help you. And you're always giving stuff away on Instagram in terms of tips, your own journey with this. So just how do people connect with you? Because you also coach, I mean, you coach my patients. I have such amazing feedback from them, you know, and I always enjoy learning from you too. How do they connect with you? And if they wanted to get some coaching with you, how do they do that?
Like obviously, like on Instagram, like those that are obviously watching now on Instagram, like you can send me a direct message on Instagram. Is a great place to connect. You'll see in my profile there's a link to a free Better Breathing ebook that I've got, so you can download that for free. There's information there as well as some videos to watch to help you improve like the basic foundations of of your breathing. And like my email address and everything is in there. So yeah, just feel free.
And somebody's asked about how you train. So I've already put the book up. Like you've trained with the Oxygen Advantage. So Patrick McGowan, and people can look him up as well, can't they? In terms of more information, and he has a lot of studies on there for those that are more academic. I've seen somebody ask about COPD, one of my colleagues actually, and it might be better having a look there, just looking for what the research says about particular conditions. So totally brilliant connecting again, and yeah, well, I'll be seeing you very soon anyway, but yeah, but thanks so much, and
thanks for having us.
That's joined today. I think it's just been brilliant. So much practical stuff we can do to reclaim our health, tap into that innate brilliance that we have to heal and really enjoy and flourish in life. So thanks guys for joining us today, and thank you David, be in touch. Bye.
Thanks.